Welcome to High Stakes Episode 3. I'm your host, Neil Orfield. Before I introduce today's guest, I'd like to do a little housekeeping. Just mention that you may have seen on Twitter this week, I asked for questions for RBX88. I did actually record an interview with RBX88 on Wednesday. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties and we might not have that file. We're still unsure if we have the recording, but hoping that we will be coming out with that recording next week. But luckily, I was able to find another guest on short notice, a great guest at that. You probably know him as Uhhuhbro on DraftKings. He also goes by Peter. And Peter has dozens of wins in the past couple of years where he won $50,000 or more, many of them 100,000 or more, maybe even dozens of 100,000 or more. I don't know. He wins so much. It's hard to keep track. Peter wins in NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, NFL, soccer, college sports. He wins main slates. He wins showdown. It is really hard to keep track of how much Peter wins because he's winning seemingly every day, it feels like. Peter, last time I asked you was a few months ago, but you've had so much success in DFS that I feel like I need to check in, every couple months. Are you still working your day job?
I am. Yeah, still work full time remote. Well, I say full time. It would be considered a full time job. Before the pandemic, I traveled every other week because it's something that you got to do on site. And so, pandemic, we've been doing it remote, but it requires a lot less hours every week. So, I mean, really,
Nice.
we're talking 20 or less hours a week
Okay.
until we start traveling again. So, they just don't ask very much from me.
That's pretty
And
nice. 20 hours a week
yeah,
you can handle, right?
it's a real easy job. Yeah, my boss is in Boston, and she's great and leaves me alone and lets me just do my work. Um, so it really isn't much trouble to do, and of course it comes with the benefits and all that. Now,
Yep.
when they ask us to start traveling again after after we get the okay to travel, I'll have a decision to make then because traveling every other week doesn't sound that great anymore.
Yep, I understand that for sure.
Mhm.
Especially when you're making so much money at DFS, you don't really need it. I understand because I held on to my day job for a lot longer than I probably should have, just because it's nice having that income and it's nice having those benefits. But
Mhm.
it's also
Safety.
takes a lot of time. So tell me about what is your job? What do you do?
So I'm a compliance examiner for a brokerage firm. I audit financial advisors. I've
Right.
been in finance, I guess, my whole career. Started with Charles Schwab in Denver back in like '98. So I've always been on the discount side of the business. Did some trading in Chicago, but then ended up as a branch manager of Scott Trade brokerage firm. I don't know if you're familiar with Scott Trade.
Oh yeah, I used to use them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I was the manager of a Scott Trade branch. Um, and once you get your licenses, you're kind of in the industry, and it's a big leg up having your licenses to stay in it. And since I was a manager, I ended up with what's called a Series 24 that allows me to do things like audit branches and things like that. So got on with a great company in Phoenix. I work remotely out of Tulsa here, and just before the pandemic, show up at advisors' offices and just audit their office. Not really
Okay.
getting into the math stuff, just making sure they're following all the FINRA rules and not keeping customer checks too long, things like that.
All right. Sounds like a great job, steady job. Sounds like it might not be your dream job, given that you're thinking about quitting once you can't travel or once they want you to travel again.
Yeah. Oh, it is a great job, and a lot of my coworkers really enjoy the travel. So I don't know if they just want to get away from the family or what, but yeah, it's been great for me, especially the remote part. We're doing them remotely now. They're not ever meant to be remote, so the process is a lot simpler. It's a lot easier doing things like looking at people's emails and
Okay.
checking what we can.
Right.
But yeah, it's a pretty laid back position right now. But going into the office is a different thing, and you never know where they're going to send you. You go all across the United States,
Okay.
so
You don't get to pick your destinations.
no.
Yep.
Unfortunately, a lot of it is you fly into O'Hare and then drive for 90 minutes somewhere that looks the same as everywhere else with the
Yep.
Walgreens and McDonald's. I've had a few trips I really enjoyed, like Oregon along the coast. I had a full day to myself. That was a lot of fun, and so you go to some cool places, but sometimes you're in some part of New Jersey in the middle of the winter, and it's just not great. Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. So your background is in finance, but just bringing this into DFS a little bit. What kind of experience do you have in terms of education and experience with statistics? Do you have any kind of formal training in statistics?
No, not at all. I actually laughed when you mentioned statistics in the notes you gave me. I was I went I was a, I'm a college dropout. Went for about 2.5 years, and one of the classes that made me be like, look, I don't enjoy this, and I'm just not going to go to class anymore. Was statistics. I was up in Boston going to school and actually transferred to University of Colorado, not to get away from the statistics class. It just happened to be like I wasn't going to get I did not get it. Um, so yeah, I ended
All
up
right.
in Colorado for another half semester, and then got on with Charles Schwab. So
Nice.
no
That's
formal training in statistics at all.
that's what's cool about that is I think that you might be the third of the four people I've interviewed, and I actually don't really know Alex's background, but I feel like both Travis Petty and Gio may have not finished college either. So a lot of people are finding success in DFS without finishing college. It seems like you really don't really need those advanced degrees. And I myself don't have any, advanced degree in any kind of statistics. So it seems like people are able to do this without any kind of formal training like that. And that's probably good to hear for a lot of listeners.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I didn't graduate, but I can't point to anything that I learned that's helped me with DFS. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. You learned outside.
and,
Yep.
and the first 2 years you're taking a lot of classes that kind of feel the same as high school. I don't. It just wasn't. Just seemed like a waste of time. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Nice. And how about computer programming? We're going to talk a little bit about optimizing. I guess we can talk about your process a little bit more. I assume you're still using Optimizer. We'll get into that later. But do you have any kind of background in computer programming?
None in programming. Computers have always made sense to me. I started using them early. My dad was an early adopter of computers, and I remember messing around on his computer. The other day on one of your podcasts with Blender, I know he mentioned BBS, and I had a BBS for a few months one summer on a computer, and I've always built my own computers, and I can fix them and make them work. But programming,
Okay.
yeah, simulations, no.
All right. So you've got some technical expertise, but not really with the computer programming specifically.
Right.
Okay. So getting into your start at DFS, just a little bit more background info. How and when did you get into DFS?
Well, I had to check Roto Tracker for that because I knew the question was coming. But I started in 2013, just casually playing around. Before that, I played online poker, some in person poker, but really got into the poker stars. I don't remember the years. I remember when it wasn't allowed anymore, so I stopped. But I had some success there, and always kind of had the personality for it. Traded stocks for a couple years in Chicago, um, and so it had a real allure to me, the possibility of winning that big money. Um, so that's what drew me in. And like I say, just casually for a couple of years, starting in 2013. It looks like I first started playing 150, and this is back when I was pretty much FanDuel only back then.
Right.
February of 2016,
Wow.
and
And
then
did
my
you what got you to start? Did you like have a big win that allowed you to start 150 maxing, or did you start with a big bankroll and just kind of decided at that point that it was, time to up it, or what got you to the 150 max?
never. Well, that was a dollar an entry, so it's $150. And at that point, I had 6 or 7 months experience, although I wasn't playing every day. So I always had an all right job. I've never had a segregated bankroll just for DFS, so I've never really thought about that in those terms. Um, but it looks like my first big win was an NHL GPP for 7,500 back in October of 2016. And you
Okay.
can see from that date, I start playing 150 pretty much every day.
Okay, so it was you had the same kind of thing as me. It sounds like
So
where you
yeah.
had kind of an instigating win that I was like, okay, I want to try to push this a little bit, see what I can do with this new money that I've got in my account.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Once you know it's possible for you to do it, I
Yeah.
mean, you got to go after it. Um, so yeah, I guess I did have a big win that kind of got me into it. And back then it was all FanDuel, and it looks like I did that for about a year or so. In the 2018 MLB season, in April, I switched almost completely to DraftKings,
Okay.
and that was after a win on DraftKings MLB. And I don't know, I
All right.
can't remember if FanDuel just I didn't feel like I had an edge anymore, and I wasn't winning, and then I happened to win on DraftKings. DraftKings it always looks so foreign to me. The website didn't look very
Yeah.
inviting. Now it's the exact opposite. I mean, FanDuel annoys me to no end.
Yeah.
Their website and their app, and I really like DraftKings. So I don't know what I was. I was a different person back then.
It's funny. I feel like we have sort of similar backgrounds in some ways in that I started, according to my Roto Tracker, I actually had my first couple entries in like 2010, but I really started playing
Wow.
in 2013 regularly. And then I was on FanDuel and I started playing on DraftKings, and it just, as a hand builder, I found FanDuel to be a lot easier because I could enter a bunch of the same contests, and it was easy for me using the UI to see when I make edits to lineup and then do them one by one.
Hmm.
Whereas DraftKings, I still struggle with when I try to hand build in DraftKings if it's in like a 150 max, finding those duped lineups in mine. Maybe there's probably a way. Maybe we can talk about it later. You can tell me. You don't really hand build though, I don't think, but
My early lineups. I
something
don't
I need to
know.
work on. But
Okay.
yeah, kind of interesting that we have similar backgrounds in those senses. Is
Yeah.
there? So I know that you use Roto Tracker. You have studied it a little bit. So do you think is there a point in time where you can kind of see looking back through it that like everything clicked, like it was like suddenly something clicked and you became much more successful like overnight, or was it something that over time you saw yourself getting better and better, or did you have success right away? I don't know if you started with a positive ROI your first year and just continued from
Oh,
there. How did it go for you in the beginning?
well, I didn't. I definitely did not make money right away. In the beginning, I kind of, well, I lost money. Tread water, maybe, depending on the length of the chart you're looking at. But for a good at least 4 years there, kind of treaded water, and lost money. Um, with a win here or there. Baseball, looking back at my Roto Tracker, I've always had some success with baseball. Um, I actually did consider myself going full time DFS about, well, in 2018, I guess. Yeah, that was
Wow.
2018. That was my first attempt at being a pro DFS player, I guess. Um, and I lost my train of thought. What was the question? Sorry.
Just whether you were everything clicked for you right away, or if
Oh, right.
you had success over time. And do you look at like your 1% finishes to see like how many lineups you're putting in the top 1% of the contest? Do you see a difference there over time? I don't know if you've studied that at all, but I'm just curious if you like can see can find little points in your process where you started getting better. Maybe you started
Yeah.
listening to a different show or using different tools. I'm just trying to pick up on whether that's something that you had something you learned clicked and suddenly everything changed for you and you got a lot better, or if it was just a gradual growth, gradual getting
Right.
better with
No,
experience.
it wasn't gradual. There was kind of I guess, an inflection point, you call it. I was always pretty good at baseball. I was in a Twitch stream by a guy named Manny Laura who did DFS back then, had a pretty big following, and he kind of unlocked it to me that there's um, a particular type of lineup. The lineup structure is what matters, not the individual players. So lineup construction is what. So I kind of took that and ran with it. 5-man stacks, and started to see how I could apply that to other sports. So based on that and some early success in baseball, I had a plan to create a process for each sport, make it as simple and as mathematical a process as possible. And that's what I was working on when I found Jordan Cooper online. And do you remember that app that had like a map of the world, and you could click on anywhere and it showed where people were streaming at that moment in the world? You
I
could
never
pull them
used
up.
that app.
Okay, well, that's where I found Jordan. This was before he was
No
with
way.
Snyder's. Yeah, and he would talk baseball and football slates, but also strategy. And I just started consuming pretty much all his content that I could find on YouTube and all that, because he was able to verbalize things that I knew from what I've been doing, the studying and just playing. I knew what he was talking about, but I could never put it into words like he could, and it just made so much sense to me. So he would really get me in the right mindset to build for GPPs. Learned a lot from him, and yeah, so that helped flip the switch for sure. And my Roto Tracker chart is pretty straight for 5 or 6 years, and then kind of shoots up
Yeah.
once I started just trying to make it a mathematical process, and trying to be smarter about it.
Yeah. And that's another way that we are very similar, that I was kind of treading water for several years and I had slight positive ROI, but I mean it also, if you once you start really winning, you look back and even that like $7,500 win that you mentioned, you don't see that. That's a blip on your
Right.
line on Roto Tracker at this point. So that's probably part of it, but yeah, definitely it took me several years to get better at DFS, and I think it helps listening to really smart players and hearing what they have to say. And I think Blender is one of the best teachers out there. I'm of course doing a podcast with him every other week these days. His Theory of DFS podcast, I've been joining him on, and I always feel like I learn a lot from him as well. So definitely helps to have smart people, kind of teach you along the way.
Yep, I enjoy that podcast as well. I listen to it every time it comes out.
Yeah, and you were on it before I was actually, and before my first appearance on it, I asked you, what kind of setup you had with your camera and your mic and
Oh,
stuff to
that's
try
right.
to get an idea how to do it. I think that was our first actual conversation on Twitter, which is kind of funny.
I think it was. Yeah, you asked me about the equipment. Yep,
Yep.
that's right. So yeah.
Let me take a minute to tell you about our sponsor, No House Advantage. No House Advantage is bringing you a different way to enjoy DFS with player props contests. It's 100% peer-to-peer to help level the playing field. Over 500 player props are offered, and all new users get a $25 deposit bonus with promo code Awesemo. That's AWESEMO. No House Advantage has mass entry capability and big prize pools. Beat your friends, not the house. Use our No House Advantage projections and optimal lineup tool to help you take down big prizes. Download in the App Store or play on nohouseadvantage.com. So obviously you consume some content, but let's get into your strategy and process first, and maybe we can discuss the kind of content you listen to as we go. But a lot of listener questions kind of revolved around your process, and particularly how you are efficient enough with it that you can maintain another job while playing DFS. You mentioned that it's not a full-time job and that you're not actually working 40 hours a week these days, but any kind of job takes up some of your time, so you don't have you can't be doing the 80 hours a week like Chess is okay on DFS, I assume. So you've got to be kind of efficient with it. So let's
Yeah.
talk about your process just a little bit, and to what extent you may have automated it over the years. Some standard questions I've been asking everybody: do you do any simulations or use simulations from outside sources at all in your process?
Well, I certainly don't do my own simulations, but I use data from simulations. As you know, the Awesemo Boom Bust tool. Um, RunTheSims.com I use for NFL Showdown. So I'm not using that website to its full advantage, but I like it. Those are the only two simulations that I can think of that I'm using.
Okay.
But yeah, nothing on my own. And
What about
I did find success when I was working a full-time job. So
right?
back in the past. So yeah, I can get some tips on that.
Nice, perfect.
Yeah.
Uh, and do you use an optimizer?
Yes. Yep. I use Fantasy Cruncher.
Yep. I
Yep.
knew the answer to that question, of course, but just gotta make sure that nothing's changed since the last time you did your interview with Blender.
I know.
Uh,
Well, I mean, I guess I need to look up when I first started using Fantasy Cruncher because I wonder if that was in 2013. Probably, I don't know how long they've been around. Probably before then.
oh, you've been using it since 2013,
Well,
since it
no,
was
I'm saying
available.
I wish I need to look that up to see if
Okay,
I was probably using I started out with Roto Grinders back in the day,
right.
and still am a Roto Grinders member. So they're kind of a backup, the lineup HQ,
So
and then
you can use their optimizer as well if Fantasy Cruncher crashes or something. You have the ability to go in and like you have enough knowledge of that optimizer to use it if you need to.
yeah, to get some live lineups in at least I can do that pretty fast. And then I've also and this is simulations as well. I'm not sure I totally understand it, but I've been working doing some things on SaberSim.
Okay.
Familiar with SaberSim?
Yeah, familiar.
Um,
I've never used it, but I'm familiar with it.
okay. Yeah, I'm trying. I don't like it for every sport, but I'm trying to use it for golf
Okay.
because I never paid much mind to golf, but there's a lot of money in golf, so I need to start getting into it.
Yeah, well, you have at least one win in your record in PGA. Like on your first page of your top wins is golf. Who knows? It could have
Yeah.
been something where you were duped with other people. I know some of my top scores are actually like I didn't win that much money. It's just a showdown where I was duped 100 times. But
No,
so I know you've done
that was about a year and a half ago, and I took first for 200,000. That was my biggest win at that time. Yeah,
nice. Okay, so it is. So you
I'm
have had
surprised.
some success at golf. Maybe not relative to the other sports where you just win every week, but you've at least won in golf in the past.
I have, but it wasn't on a process that I can. It was not a
Replicate.
process I could repeat
Okay.
the way I did it. So I can
Okay.
get into how I did it if you want, but yeah, it's not something I could repeat.
Um, yeah, let's talk about it. What did you do that you can't repeat with that process?
Well, it was. I watched a video on Roto Grinders, and it was STL Cards showing his process for that specific tournament. and just kind of uh, dropping knowledge the whole way along, and basically gave me the player pool. I think it was like 33 or 39 golfers that he would use. And I never saw another video quite like it, but it gave me the exact player pool. And then I just instituted some rules that he talked about along the way, and did some things for ownership, and spit out 150 and threw them in there. And then
Wow.
yeah, that Sunday I'm sweating the first place at a hockey game with my brother, and that was, I mean, that was one of my first. Well, that was my biggest win. It's basically tied for my biggest win ever.
You just
Yeah,
had one in NFL Showdown this year, I know. That was around 200,000. So
right. I think I got 3 200s now, but that was my first 200, and that kind of, that's the bankroll, the DFS bankroll, if you will. Like once I got that, I could start playing higher stakes
yeah,
and
that'll
things
help.
like that, and yeah, get beat up more, and yeah.
I don't think you've been getting beat up that much. I think relative to most people out there, it seems like you're doing okay.
Well, in the
Um,
higher stakes, I really enjoyed your conversation with Petty last episode, where you talked about the move to higher stakes and getting beat down, because that's been my experience. Except for baseball, every sport's different in DFS.
yeah.
But basketball high stakes, I get crushed. So
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering about that because I know that you had several high stakes wins in MLB this past summer.
yes.
Um, but yeah, and actually I had one in MLB this summer as well. So maybe MLB is one where I would excel. Maybe I could try that for high stakes as well. But yeah, I definitely get beat down in NBA. So glad to hear that it's not just easy for everybody but me.
Definitely not.
All
Maybe
right.
for Petty, I don't know.
I mean,
He's
for
on the
Petty, it
last
seems
night.
to be. He
Yeah.
was like, "Yeah, I don't really remember ever struggling with it." Sounded like he was, which maybe he just doesn't remember, but I get the impression that he probably was, and I think it's partially because he uses his own projections, and that's just pretty helpful. And they're great projections, and he just knows what he's doing, so he doesn't need to adjust as much maybe as we do when we're playing the from large field to small fields. If you maybe you don't
Right.
need to adjust as much if you're using your own projections. Which, speaking of that, next question: do you create your own projections from scratch?
Oh no, definitely not.
Okay.
Um, I've always felt like that wasn't worth it. Maybe 5 years ago or something.
Yeah.
Um, and Petty Theft would disagree, and he's winning at NBA. So
He just won
what do
last
I?
night. Another
Yeah,
150,000 last night.
exactly. So I think he would disagree with me on NBA for sure. But I don't. I don't particularly like sports anymore, or I don't follow sports news. I'll watch games if I have a sweat involved, or if it's like some player I have a ton of, just to see what happens. But
Okay.
yeah,
So no
no.
projections.
As far as making my own projections, no. I take them from Awesemo, or aggregate them from another site.
Okay.
I'm incorporating randomness and rules and groups.
Okay.
So, people ask me what projections I use, but then I'm also using randomness, so that kind of
Yeah, yeah. No,
blows
we'll
it
we'll
out of
get
the
there.
water.
We'll get
But
there.
yeah, okay,
I got plenty of questions about what
yeah,
else you set, and we don't want to obviously get into your exact settings because I'm sure you're probably like me in that they probably change day to day, and obviously sport to sport you can't use the same projections for everything or the same rules for everything in Fantasy Cruncher, but at least for me it changes pretty frequently. So yeah, I'd like to get into your process a little bit more, and let's talk about them kind of individual sports. We had a question about NHL, and it's currently NHL and NBA season. So let's start there. I saw that recently you were playing NFL. That was a lot in your recent history. You had a lot of NHL scores. Is that something that was just because it was NBA All Star break, or do you regularly play
yeah.
NHL?
Nope, it was just because of the NBA All Star break.
Okay, so we
It's
don't need
kind of
to.
like an annual thing for me now to get back to my roots in NHL. Even though I guess I got third place the other night, but I think overall I probably lost a little bit of money this All Star break in NHL.
Okay,
Um, but I mean, it really is. It's just not that difficult sport, at least to build for. I'm not taking first every night, or winning, but lineup construction wise, I mean, there's a certain way to go, and so
okay.
that makes it easier.
Is it similar to MLB where it's like you do you full stack or do you have like one offside? I've never
Yeah,
I shouldn't say I've played NHL, but like it was a couple years ago. I played like a couple nights and then I totally forgot what I did. I know there's stacking involved, but is it similar to MLB or is it kind of its own
yeah.
animal?
No, it is similar to MLB. You got the goalie that's kind of like a pitcher, and then popular stacks are 4-3,
Okay.
or 3.
Is it eight total players
Yes,
outside the goalie?
I think 9 maybe.
Okay. So you
Is it
say
9?
4-3 and then two one offs?
Yeah, and one of them's a goalie. So
Okay.
4-3, a one off and a goalie, and then
Okay.
3-3-2 is another popular as far as upside goes. And I might not be up to date on the latest, but as far as I know, it's those are the two stacks that you want to roll with. But I definitely have not looked what's going on in hockey lately.
Okay.
Although I still see the same people, what testosterone and what is it, beep I'm a Jeep or something like that. Always,
Oh yeah, beep on a Jeep. Yeah.
yeah, they're always taking down hockey. It seems like.
Yep. These are players I've heard of. Don't see them as much in all the sports that I played. Not really NBA players. I don't think as much, but I'm familiar with the names. Um, did have a listener question, which they asked which site you use for ownership and projections for NHL. Do you use Awesemo for those? Do you do aggregating for that? What do you
Yeah,
use for NHL?
for these NHL games, I aggregated between Awesemo and Roto Grinders.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
just kind of a little macro in Excel to combine them together. Because then I'm going to add on randomness and yeah.
All right. Well, that's as much time as I want to spend on NHL because I really want to dive into your NBA process because I play NBA. I see
Uh,
you in it all the time. You're doing great, and your process is, I think, pretty involved. It's actually, I think, in a lot of ways similar to mine, is my understanding. But I'd love to hear about it a little bit more because I think that it's kind of a more advanced, actually, process than mine. So somebody asked for NBA, how long before lock do you start your process?
so around here, lock is usually at 6 o'clock,
Yep.
and if I had the time, I'll start at 4 with the Osmo show. With it's usually Ship and Laffy at
Yep.
4 o'clock. Um, I've been watching them for a long time. Um, Sometimes I will start at like 4:30 or 4:45 and watch them at 2x. Um, but yeah, usually I'm caught up live with about 15 minutes to go before lock. Whether I start at 4 or 4:30, kind of do things in between. But it also depends on the slate, how many games lock at 6.
Yep.
But never before 4. Now, a year or two ago, I'd listen to the show in the morning and do stuff, but with COVID and all that, everyone being out, and it just didn't make any sense to do anything in the morning, really.
So you watch my shows all the time, and you've made the comment that we are really similar. And everything you say, I'm like, you're just describing me exactly. Like that's exactly me. I never start before 2 hours before lock. And I used to same thing. I used to watch all the morning shows and stuff. And I think as a new player, you can learn a lot from those shows. They're actually like just the way they talk about the slates when they do review from the night before. I think that there's a lot that you can take away from that. It's just once you've been playing as long as you and I have, it's not as necessary, and you gotta allocate
Right.
your time a little bit differently. So yeah, I'm the same way. I start, usually it's more like an hour and a half, maybe hour 45 minutes before lock, depending also on how many games there are. And then I'm listening at 1.5x or 2x. So very similar. That's really funny.
Well, and
Um,
NBA is a beast. Like I'm always more comfortable if I can hear Adam or Rinpack break down a slate because there's stuff they talk about that aren't in projections and they know the game. That's kind of the edge that Petty has. He knows the game inside and out, and the current players and rotations and all that. So in NBA, there's an edge. So, but in other sports, don't really need to watch the shows like MMA, golf. You don't really need to. Yeah.
Yeah, I watch shows. I just watch an hour show for each MMA and golf. But NBA for sure
Okay.
is the one that I think it's completely necessary. Just because I'm like you, I don't watch every game. I like watching basketball. It's something that I just enjoy doing. Sometimes I'm going to the Timberwolves game tonight, but I
Oh,
probably
nice.
watch 1 to 2 games a week. I'm not watching every game. I'm not really digging into the numbers on my own, and that's partially just because I know I don't have to because they do such a good job of it talking about it on deeper dive and live before lock. So it's really not necessary. They'll tell me all that I need to know about how the rotations are changing and what might be going on that night. So yeah, I don't always find it
Definitely.
necessary to do on my own. So that's funny that you're listening to the same things that I am at the same time that I am. It sounds like.
Well, their number of viewers gets. I mean, gosh, I see them at like two. Is it 3,000 viewers, or am I
Yeah,
making that up? 2,000 maybe.
that sounds about right. Yeah,
It's a lot
concurrent
of
viewers.
viewers. Yeah.
Yeah, people have learned that it's that they do a pretty good job. So yeah, it's helpful for sure. At what point do you start going into your fantasy cruncher and making adjustments and kind of trying to play around with it?
We're talking about building for the NBA slate.
Yep, for NBA.
Oh well, pretty much right away.
Okay.
The video is a game. They go game by game. So I just go right along with them,
Oh,
and
nice.
yeah, and I transferred some data from Awesemo over to Fantasy Cruncher. um, the boom bust type stuff.
Okay.
The boom, you can boom bust, you can export it and import it right into Fantasy Cruncher and have it right there. So
I've
kind
heard
of
that you
do.
can. I have never actually done that myself. I've heard that you can. Is that something that saves overnight, or do you need to do that every day?
Oh, that's a daily thing. Doesn't save
Okay.
overnight.
All right.
Yeah, so I'll update that. Gosh, 10 times a night, 5, 10 times a night, something like that. Because with all the projection and ownership changes.
Right.
And then I bring data in from rotor grinders as well, and kind of do some stuff in Excel with that just to combine it. Nothing crazy.
Okay. Nice. So
Uh,
you're starting in pretty early.
Now what's that?
So you're starting in pretty early with your actual process. I do. So for me, this is one way that we're different. I listen for a while before I usually don't open it
Oh,
until
I see.
probably an hour before lock. I don't really start doing anything. So that's just because, especially now with how quickly things change closer to lock, I feel like it's
Hmm.
just I don't really want to start bothering until then. But
Gotcha. Yeah, I throw that stuff in there and listen to them go game by game, and just start cutting people off teams I don't even want to play. Just based on boom percentage usually.
okay,
Uh, and that just and the whole time I'm crunching just to see what changes that made. Taking this guy out, what changes? What do the lineups look like now?
yeah.
Important to actually look at the lineups. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you mentioned on the Theory of DFS podcast when you were a guest with Blender that you heavily edit your player pool for NBA. And when you say that, do you mean that you intentionally zero out players so that it's like there's no chance you're going to get them?
Right. Yeah. I just take them out of the pool.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at lineup study, you'll see pros. It kind of runs the gamut. Some don't seem to mess with the player pool at all. Some take a lot of players out. Um, I couldn't tell you, on such a game slate, I have this many players, but I feel like it's usually around 35 or 40
Wow. Okay.
players because, I just don't see any reason keeping a player in a pool that never has ceiling games.
Okay.
Um,
And you say you're using the boom bust tool for that
right.
for deciding who you're taking out.
Yeah. So, I don't want someone with a 2% boom and an optimal of like 0.2%. Like, why would I want them to end
Yeah.
up in the lineup? And also with the less players, I just feel like I have more control over what's happening. It's not going to slide some random guy in that I didn't
Does,
notice.
does that ever become an issue during late swap where like somebody is looks terrible in the boom bust tool and you forget to go in and then somebody's hurt so then they're become more relevant and maybe do have a better boom chance. Do you ever like forget to re-add a player? Is that ever a concern for you or not something that you that
It's
can
something.
control for?
Well, it might have happened, but I can't think of it. I can't remember that happening.
Okay.
I mean, I've had a couple. I've done a late swap before where I left teams off and didn't realize it, so I just basically xed out whole games. Um,
And
and
do you do that regularly where you eliminate an entire game from your player pool?
no, not usually.
Okay.
Um, Usually, I'll have at least one or two guys from a team, but that's not a set rule. I mean, if there's a horrible looking game, like a 200 total with everyone healthy, and it's an 11 game slate or something, I got no problem xing them out. Like,
Yep.
it kind of started. Basketball is where I really learned the most. I mean, it's a difficult sport to play, but I saw the same guys winning or doing well every night, so I knew there was some kind of secret to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, just yeah, a lot of research, looking at winning lineups and doing the lineup study stuff, and you can see. Well, at least I started to see the winning lineups have some commonalities as far as like salary, how many players from each team, um, and then when you drill down and look at the pros playing it, you can see they never play this guy with that guy, and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. That kind of stuff just gave me ideas for a process, and that's kind of what I put together.
And that's another thing that you mentioned to Blender that you actually go team by team to create groups to eliminate negative correlation. Is that something you do every night, no matter like how many games are on the
Mhm.
slate or what the slate is like? You go and create groups.
I do, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think it's important. I think a lot of people don't. Sometimes they'll do it if it's an obvious situation, and I'll hear them sometimes on the Awesemo show, and they're like, "I want to play more than two of these three guys." I'm always like, "I want to play more than one of those three guys on
Yeah.
on a bigger slate."
Yeah.
Just because there's so many more options, and I feel like making the groups really makes me different, especially
Yeah.
because I'm so restrictive. And yeah, every once in a while, I'll look at the winning lineup and see, well, I remember making that rule, and because of that rule, I was never going to win. But that's not too often.
Yeah.
There's that, and then I'll see a player that I left out of my pool in the winning lineup, and that's happened less and less to me as time goes on, just with experience. But yeah, that has happened before.
Okay.
And if I make a rule that makes it impossible for me to win, then I lose and
Yeah,
play
you can
tomorrow. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
You live another day tomorrow. That's really interesting. That's so your process is way more involved than mine is, and it sounds like it's pretty advanced. So how many groups would you say you create on like a random like a Wednesday with a 10 game slate? How many groups do you think you typically create?
On a 10 game slate, I would guess it would be around 10 to 20,
Okay.
15, 20. Yeah, probably not 25, maybe 20 max.
Okay, so not necessarily every team. You don't necessarily find correlations. Just you find certain teams where you feel like you need to set these correlation rules.
Yeah, especially on a big slate. What's the oh, I'm trying to think of actual basketball players. There's what's the team with D'Angelo Russell,
The
Patrick
Timberwolves.
Beverly.
Yeah,
Who
that's
was
my
that?
team.
Yeah, there you
That,
go. Your team.
yeah, yeah.
Beverly, help me out here. Who are the three big
Patrick
guys?
Beverly, D'Angelo Russell, and Edwards.
Edwards, yeah. So for a while there, if you look at game logs, it looks like Edwards and Russell kind of trade off big games. And then you got Beverly in the mix too. But if you just start looking at that, I mean, it's going to be a very rare game where both Edwards and one of those other two guys are both in a winning lineup of a 10-game NBA slate. And if they are, then you should probably run it back with someone from the other side. And there's a group for you too if you want it.
Do you set those groups for the give me a run back if I have these two together? Do you set that kind of group?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
It usually only happens on smaller slates because I usually only set it for the expensive players on one team. If it wants to play both expensive players on one team, then I'm going to want to run back the highest projected guy from the other team, or
interesting.
thereabouts. I might add another one. Um, but yeah, I definitely do that. Or I'll just say, don't play them together. Like Chris Paul and Devin Booker, I don't play them together, like ever.
Wow. Okay.
I think it's burnt me once a year or two ago, but other than that, like, I mean, maybe there was like a 3 game slate or something. I wouldn't do that on a 2 or 3 game slate, but on a
Right.
regular, even a 6 game slate, like, probably not going to play them together almost ever.
Okay. And is this do the groups save overnight? I feel like they might, but you probably
You
know better than
know,
I do. Can you can't save a group
yeah,
from one night to the next?
you can save it. You can
Okay.
save it, but it doesn't save automatically. You have to press the buttons.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but I did that for a while a couple years ago and would load them in, and you'd have all sorts of groups that didn't have anything to do with the games that were playing that day. Because you
Okay.
have saved Dallas Mavericks groups and they're not playing today.
Right.
So you'd have to go through and delete them. And I feel more in touch and in tune with the slate when I do it by hand, basically. And I can do it pretty quick just by experience. Looking at the teams, I have regular groups I play with these teams, like
Right.
Jaren Jackson and Steven Adams. I don't want them in the same lineup. That's like an automatic group. So, and it's just in my head, and then everything else gets filled in by the Awesemo guys on YouTube.
Wow. Okay. That's really interesting. So that's a part of your process that is much more involved than mine. I know I don't set that many groups unless it's really obvious, and I'll set more. I think on larger slates. I don't know actually which I set more on. So
Right.
how many would you say you do on a 3 game slate? How many groups would you say you typically set?
Uh, it
Is it
really could be
proportionate?
no. You would think it would be proportionate, but it really can be the same. Like I've had 3 game slates, I believe, with 10 groups.
Okay.
Um, it's hard to imagine right now, but that sounds right. It just depends on who's playing, but also what the lineups are looking like. I might look at lineups and they just all look chalky to me, and by making this one group, I can get a lot different. And yeah,
Okay.
but no, it's not really proportionate.
Yeah, I mean that actually makes sense to me. That wouldn't necessarily be that you just every slate is different, right? So you just want to look at it differently for every slate and find ways to find
Right.
an edge.
And with the smaller slates, you can get much more into like you can do lots of teeny tiny groups that are probably never going to come up. Like FC is not trying to make that decision, but just in case, because I'm going to do things with ownership and projection later and stuff, and maybe it'll throw some of those guys in there.
Right. Okay. And do you ever use the checkbox to only give boosts? In groups in Fantasy Cruncher, you can check a little box and change and say like, give me a 10% boost if I'm using this
Yeah.
player, or a negative 10% boost if I'm using this player to these other players. Do you ever do that, or do you just fully exclude players from groups?
Oh, I do that. Yeah.
Okay.
I add the boost. Not every night. I've done it maybe 10 times. I kind of I'm not I don't have a real good grip on how it, okay, so the problem is if you put in like plus 10%, you have to recrunch and then you really have to look at how that affected your lineups. At least I do. I
Yep.
don't feel as in control of what's happening when I do that. So it's, I don't know, it kind of takes some extra time to do. And sometimes with some of the other things I do, I feel like the plus 5 or 10% gets compounded
Okay.
and it's not what I want. So maybe I just don't have enough experience with it, but I've been playing around with it a little bit.
Okay. So not a big part of your process. You're usually setting groups so
Right.
you only get one out of the two or one out of the three, and it's a hard rule. It's not like give me less of these guys together. It's a
Right. Just
limited. Okay.
groups to rule out negative correlation, as I've
Yep.
always said. Because how you got to think, how are these two guys both going to have ceiling games? What is that game going to look like? How are these guys going to both be in the winning lineup?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
no, you got me thinking that I need to adjust my process and get a little bit more involved because I mean it makes a lot of sense what you're saying to do these groups and
yeah,
you've had a lot of success with it. So maybe I
well, I
need
think
to.
what started me on that was Blender talking about how the importance of looking at your lineups.
Yeah.
Going one by one, like would I build this? And so everyone should be doing that. And I think that's kind of where I got a bit obsessive with groups because I'd
Okay.
find like, well, I don't want those two guys together. Like there's a group, and just
Yeah.
kind of spiraled from there.
And I know people have said, I know Blender has said this, I think others have as well, that, even when you're using an optimizer, really your goal is to make a lot of lineups that look like they were hand built. So I
Totally.
think it sounds like you are really getting in control of that. Whereas I sometimes will have lineups where I'm like, ooh, I probably wouldn't have wanted those two players together. Although I set caps on like the number of players from a team and stuff. So I kind of do it in different ways to some extent. But yeah, for sure,
Mm.
you're doing it the way you're doing it is more advanced and probably is, helping you gain some EV on guys like me who are maybe being a little bit too lazy with it.
Hopefully.
Um, so I know that there are a number of pros who don't use any randomness in Fantasy Cruncher because they like to have complete control over their player pool. I think you mentioned earlier that you use randomness, but I just want to double check. Are you in the camp, the no randomness camp, or do you use some randomness in your approach to NBA?
I use randomness
Okay.
in all sports, I think, especially in NBA, not just for the speed of the crunch, but also just to mix things up. I mean, a lot, you might be able to boil my process down to just cutting out all the players who I don't think are going to be in the winning lineup. So I just have the player pool of players I think are going to be the winning lineup, and then I'm going to try to jumble them up in ways that other people aren't doing. And every once in a while, it works out, and I get first.
Yeah. I
One
mean,
way to describe it. So I definitely use randomness,
okay.
and that's just I have a different process than other people because I'm not as confident in basketball and just kind of like to scatter guys around a bit more. I think.
Yeah. And does it vary by sport, like the amount of randomness that you use? Like, do you use higher randomness in MLB, for example, because it's more random essentially and basketball is more projectable, or do you use kind of the uniform amount across sports?
No, every sport is unique, so I use a different amount of randomness for each sport, and even each position in some sports it's different randomness because they have different randomness.
Yeah.
Um, so I try to do that. And in NBA, I'm using a standard deviation to get randomness. I'm just doing a little thing in Excel to get that, and then throw it back in.
Okay. So you're
And
using every different player has its own randomness, has its own randomness.
right, based on their standard deviation,
Okay.
um, which is interesting. It gives the guys with lower projections higher randomness, so you might get them more often. A couple of years ago, I just had a set number that I used, um, but I like this way more. And this year, especially, I've with late swap, I start reducing the randomness as I late swap, which
Okay.
I don't know how much of an effect that has, but I've liked some of the results from doing that.
Do you do a lot of tinkering? So that's part of my process too. As I late swap, I am typically becoming less restrictive and letting Fantasy Cruncher do its job more. So I'm
Hmm.
reducing randomness to try to get, especially if there is big breaking news. I think you can gain an advantage because if a player's projection goes up by a lot, you probably want more of that player. So if you reduce randomness and his projection has gone up a lot, you're going to get more of that player by not having a lot of randomness on there, and that's kind of a way to gain edge. But are there other ways that change things up in Fantasy Cruncher when you're going to use late swap to make sure that it's giving you lineups that you want? Like, do you reduce the number of groups ever, or like allow it to give you more players from the same team? Do you do anything like that to adjust for late swap?
I can. I mean, it's all. and I have. It's all slate specific,
Okay. Yeah.
really. And, it just depends on news and how many teams are left. And I kind of look at NBA slates. Well, I do look at NBA slates as having tranches, like the first tranche of games at 6 to 6:30, and then you got the final tranche at like 9. I'll kind of do things at each one of those intervals, um, like reducing randomness or lessening some of the restrictions I've put on what the lineups have to do, ownership or projection wise,
Yep.
just based on, especially lately, I have a minimum salary of 49,700 on NBA lineups. Um, but a couple of weeks ago, there were some nights where to late swap effectively, you really had to remove that. And I think even a lineup below 49.7 won a tournament, which is very rare. So yeah, do little things as the night goes on to, yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned on Blender's Pod that you also set a cap on the ownership projection for a given lineup. Is that something that you still are do you do that for most of your lineups when you are crunching out lineups? You set a cap on the sum ownership of your lineup?
Ownership, some, yeah, yeah, almost always. On a big NBA slate, I don't usually bother with it actually lately, just because of all the craziness that happens after lock. I figured why bother.
Okay.
So what I've been doing there is looking at players in the early games to kind of cap based on the optimal and boom percentage at Awesemo, so that I don't fill up on the early value and then a lot of stuff opens up later.
Okay.
Um,
Nice.
yeah.
So
Uh,
you no go ahead.
oh, as far as were you asking about capping individual players,
Yeah.
or am I jumping ahead?
Uh, you're jumping. So I asked you about whether you do individual randomness for individual players. But yeah, that is something that I wanted to get to. So you said on Blender's Pod that you use the late swap optimizer tool in Fantasy Cruncher to create lineups even before lock, which a lot of people probably don't know you can do that. But that's actually what I do as well,
Mm,
using the late swap optimizer tool. But because you're using that, you can't crunch out more lineups than you're going to use, or at least I don't think that there is a way to create more lineups than like you can't crunch out 500 if you only have 150 in your
correct. Yeah, you're totally right.
yeah. So then because of that, you can't create more lineups. So what do you do to shape how much you get of a given player? So that is a question that I was getting to. So do you set like a universal exposure cap on players, or do you do it player by player?
Yeah,
How do you do that?
my universal exposure cap is 100%.
Okay.
Really, most of the time, like I don't restrict. The only time I started restricting is just a couple of weeks ago with those crazy slates where we know we're going to have news. I'll start capping guys early because I don't want 60% of some value guy who's going to be 35 or 40% owned when there's all sorts of unknowns later in the night. So I'll cap there, but otherwise I don't cap.
Even
And
individually, you don't cap players individually either.
correct,
Okay.
yeah, I do. I just leave it at 100%.
Yep.
Um, and then I'll do things like require a minimum projection for my lineups and or maximum ownership sometimes.
Okay.
Um, that so I know where my player exposures are at. Of course, somebody would say it's not the player exposures, but it's the lineups. Um, but I know
Sure.
where my player exposures are, and I'm crunching out 300 every time and looking at them. So I know approximately what it's going to be when I use the late swap feature to do 150.
Okay, so you do you do crunches before you put in the late swap just to see what your player exposures would be with 300 lineups, just to get an idea of your pool.
Yeah, before I use the late swap optimizer to actually put my lineups in, I've been working on the slate for probably at least an hour at least, and have probably done like 30 or 40 crunches by that time. Um, I kind of crunch obsessively as I'm making changes, just to kind of keep current with what it looks like right now.
Yep.
So yeah, by the time we're getting close to lock and I start using the late slot optimizer feature to actually get lineups in, like I know what those lineups look like and who's in them until the first late swap really.
Okay. Uh, and do you use like the maybe you control for this by putting a cap on your ownership, which is something that I don't do. But I'm curious if you use like the thumbs up feature in Fantasy Cruncher, or do you ever adjust the projections to get to different exposure levels that you like?
I rarely use the thumbs tool. I think it nudges the projection by 8%.
Okay.
Um, but I think if you have a minimum projection required from your lineups, I'm not sure it accounts for that. Although maybe it does based on the percentages I've gotten in the past.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if it does. I don't really use the thumbs up feature either, just because I adjust projections manually. So is that something that
Yeah,
you do? Do you adjust the projections, or do you just control your exposures through other means?
yeah. I don't adjust projections very often at all. Maybe once a week. Maybe if I'm just getting so much of a guy and he's burnt me a million times before, and I'm just not. I don't want my whole night to rest on that guy. Then yeah, I'll probably change projections a little bit. But I really try not to get involved. I'm all about taking bias out of the game. And I don't know. Like I gotta trust the projections really because I don't follow it close enough to know. I don't know anything about the matchup or who's. I mean, I kind of know who's good at defense, who people talk about and stuff, but I don't know rotations or anything like that. So yeah, I just got to go with the projection, and if it says that I should be playing 90% of some scrub who has a lot of opportunity tonight, then I'll probably just do it.
Yeah. But
And if
that's
I lose,
that's
I
it.
lose.
You're saying that, but that's because it says you should get 90% using the adjustments that you've made to, the max ownership in a lineup, and also the randomness for individual players. So you do a lot of other things. So you don't really need to make those kinds of decisions, because it's kind of telling you like this player is too good to not have 90% of them after you've already accounted for,
Right.
you
And
know.
I will say on NBA that I think I use more randomness than people would think.
Okay,
And that helps not to get 80% of three different players or something.
that's true. Yeah.
Because sometimes with the amount of randomness I use, I'll get max like 55% of a player.
Okay. Yeah. So you're using more randomness than I am, I think. Because sometimes even with the randomness that I use, if I don't continually adjust projections and recrunch, I'll get 100% of sometimes several players. So,
Mhm.
so you
Well,
must
especially
be.
lately, the last month or two. I mean, that has made sense a couple of nights for sure.
Yeah, but you're also, I mean, you're using it in a very intelligent way. If you're doing individual using standard deviations, that's pretty advanced stuff to be,
Yeah,
doing it by player. Whereas I set one randomness for all players. Typically, I mean, I depending on the sport, sometimes like you said, different positions, I'll do different randomness, and there are, some differences there. But in general, I'm just
right.
doing standardized across the board. So that's
Well,
a really smart way to play.
one of these really smart guys in DFS could probably backtest all that and see which one's best R or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and tell us. But yeah, I don't. I mean, who knows if what I'm doing makes a difference? Um,
It looks like it does. Just looking at your results, I think it probably makes some difference. You seem to be
well, this has been a
okay
tough
at this
NBA
DFS
season.
thing.
I put 2 wins together in NBA. I don't know, 3 to 5 weeks ago or so. But
Yeah.
besides that, it has not been a fun NBA season. That's for sure.
How much are you playing high stakes NBA these days? Have you given up that endeavor because you haven't had success at it, or are you still trying to
No,
get
that's
better?
correct. Yeah, I was not being competitive in NBA high stakes.
Okay.
So after a week or so, just getting beat up every night, I quit playing. And honestly, this I started treating NBA as just for fun. I'm playing 150 for fun. I'm not going to be too worried about if I win or lose, and that's kind of helped me because really I feel like I'm waiting for baseball season to come back around,
Yep.
which was my best season. But it's taking a lot of pressure off with the NBA.
Yeah.
Not playing high stakes, not making a $10,000 mistake or something like I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah. Yep, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, baseball, you had an incredible season. I think your baseball season was one of the best seasons I've ever seen from somebody. You can't win a million baseball, right? So you just had to win so many
Oh,
100,000 top prizes, and it seemed like you did regularly. It seemed like it was. I think I made the comment once. It seemed like every time I would win like 25 or 50,000 in baseball this season, you
oh,
would
I
win
remember
100,000.
that.
You won 100,000 in a different tournament. It was like anytime I
I
won,
remember that
there
now.
you were winning more. So you definitely had a great season in baseball. So what? Let's talk about baseball just for a minute, just because it is I would the sport that I think you're best known for. Even though you win at all these sports, I think just your run at baseball last year is probably something that people are really curious about. So, do you do the same kind of process for baseball? Like, are you setting any kind of um, max exposure in a lineup, an ownership sum for your lineups in baseball? Are you using let's start there. Let's start one question at a time.
Yeah.
Do you do the same kind of thing where you're using a max ownership sum in baseball, and do you adjust it all for high stakes versus low stakes?
Well, I do. Uh, I do use a max. It's slate specific.
Okay. Yep.
Um, and what was the follow up? Sorry. High stakes versus low stakes.
Yeah.
Um, if we're talking about maximum ownership. So yeah, I do use it for high stakes. I'd have to check my notes. Yeah, I have notes for each sport, like in an
Okay.
Excel or Word file.
Smart.
Um, but I don't, maybe a little bit, but not too much. I mean, those high stakes tournaments, the 888 or whatever, those are pretty small. So I don't think I worried about ownership in those.
Okay.
But this last season, yeah, I had success in high stakes, but really not much in the main, the $15. I need to check the stats on that. But yeah, that was kind of it's opposite of NBA, I guess.
That's funny. It seemed like you won some of those as well, so that probably helped some winning a few of those tournaments.
I'll have to
But
double check, yeah. But ownership it's all slate dependent, of course, but ownership isn't that big a deal in baseball.
yeah. And what about your like? When do you start your process for baseball? So we both said that we start for NBA maybe a couple hours before the slate starts. Do you do the
Yeah,
same thing for baseball, or is it? Can you do it in a shorter amount of time? What do you do there?
you can do it in a shorter amount of time. I mean, it's not as nerve wracking as basketball, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I kind of enjoy it. I have a spreadsheet that I've shared with people before that I kind of put the whole slate on so I can visualize it. I got all the pitchers and then all the teams, and different percentages from different places. The top stacks tool on Awesemo, and that way I can just see it all right in front of me on Excel spreadsheet. And then I have some sources that I've um, been reading or listening to for a long, long time. It's kind of tough to, there's, I guess you call them touts in baseball that I just trust. They're DFS touts. They talk about, uh, I guess, who they like, but they win money,
Okay.
and have a history of winning. So they also talk about lineup construction. And it's guys from RG and Awesemo data. And I just kind of fill in the spreadsheet and I color code it. I have a whole process. And
Wow.
when I'm done, as long as there's no lineup changes, I can do that in the morning just as long as stuff's out. And I'll usually watch a live before lock, and just make sure nothing big has changed. Update
Okay.
ownership and let it fly. Because the
Nice.
top DAX tool and the ownership is changing as you
Yeah.
get closer to lock. So I got to adjust for that. So I start much earlier, usually in the morning. But it's not like I'm putting in hours and hours. Maybe an hour in the morning, and
Okay.
then maybe half an hour before lock or something. I'll watch a show. Yeah, for baseball, actually, I always watch the Roto Grinders live before lock with those guys.
Okay. Nice. So you it sounds like you put in a lot more time than I do for baseball. I spend way more time on basketball, and it's a lot more effort for me in basketball. A lot more
Oh,
mental effort. Baseball. I mean, I I think the important thing for me is that I change what I'm doing every slate, and it sounds like you are too. But it's still something that even on a difficult slate, it's not going to take me more than an hour. I think most slates. So that's interesting to hear how much effort you put into it. And I mean, making spreadsheets and stuff. That's a lot of effort. That's really impressive, and it's showing in your results for sure.
I appreciate it. I mean, the
What?
spreadsheet is made. I just have to put a little bit of data into it for today's slate, and so it's not much trouble at all. And, baseball's got a nice pace. There's Basketball is just so difficult compared to all the others to really feel ready for.
Yeah. Basketball is the hardest because things change so close to lock. Most sports, I mean, even football, they tell you an hour and a half before it starts what which players are
Right.
in or out. So you don't really need to be waiting and making adjustments really late. Whereas basketball is just a minute before lock, something big can come up. So it's definitely the most stressful for
Well,
me.
and with I mean, that's the edge, right? If the late news in basketball, you have a minute to react, and you do, and you get a ton of the guy you're supposed to get, and then you lose money that night.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of really solid players in basketball. I think you said on Blender's podcast that it was like over 20% of the field is 150 maxes in NBA. Does that
Yeah,
sound
back
right?
when it was like 25%.
Which is a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot.
So
It really
it's a lot
is.
to be with.
It's interesting. We talk about every sport is different, but each has its own kind of the GPPs change. We know at the beginning they're going to be bigger, and then we know about when they're going to get smaller and more ugly payout wise. Um,
Right.
so yeah, hopefully we have a baseball season this year. I'm looking forward to the first few weeks.
Yeah, me too. So speaking of baseball, so like what does your player pool look like in terms of, so I know you're doing a lot of stacking, obviously, but so say we're on a 10 game MLB slate, how many teams do you think you are using in stacks?
Um, let's see. It's been a while since I had to do some baseball stuff,
Yeah.
but on a 10 gamer, I am probably going to be stacking. I'll say 12 teams, 13 teams, maybe.
Okay.
Kind of depends on the ownership. I mean, hopefully the Yankees are playing at home because everyone loves the Yankees at home.
Yep.
Hell, hopefully they're in cores or something, and then you just fade them completely and spread it out elsewhere. But yeah, maybe 10 to 12 teams probably.
So are you it sounds like you would be more likely to fade the most negatively leveraged teams than the teams with the lowest odds of being the top stack in baseball. Is that typically your process? You're just if a team is too negatively leveraged, you will eliminate them, or is it like if a team has a 15% chance of being the top stack, but they're owned 30%, are you still going to use that team just because their odds of being the top stack is the highest on the slate?
Okay, so no, I wouldn't use that team if they have a
Okay.
15% chance or 30% on. So yeah, I'm getting rid of negatively leveraged teams, um, based on the Awesemo Top Stacks tool.
Okay.
Pretty much, I kind of export that into the Excel spreadsheet, which is not as fancy as people might be imagining. Um,
Sounds fancy. It's color coded, right?
yeah, that's right. I have colors on it. I paste the new top stacks tool, and it instantly tells me, what my percentages are because I tell the optimizer I want 6% of this team and 5% of this team.
Yep.
So based on the ownership, I can tell what my leverage is, what the field's leverage is, and if the Yankees are being owned twice as much, I'm happy to just get rid of the Yankees
Okay.
and go another way because baseball. Uh, is so much unlike other sports. People say it's a game of failure. People are not likely to get hits, usually. So it's really easy for me to just to fade in baseball, fade the whole team,
And would you so you fade the entire team. Do
or
you
I should say
only
the whole team. Fade the stack,
okay,
but I'll still get one offs, two offs. If it's cores or something, yeah,
okay. So you could still include them in your secondary stack pool.
for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, as one offs, or because I just do 5x. I'll do like a 5-man stack, and then maybe I'll get a 2-man stack, but I don't force it or anything.
Oh, you don't force in a two-man stack. Okay.
No, I just get 3 one-offs usually from different teams.
Okay.
And
And
I
does that change for you depending on like the size of the slate and different aspects, the pitching and that kind of stuff? Do you sometimes do like four-man stacks, 4-3 stacks? It's always a five-man for you?
I'll tell you what, it is always a 5-man for me. Sometimes I remember now that I'll force 5-3.
Okay. Yep.
And I'd have to check my notes to remember when that could be advantageous.
Is it weather games? Like if you have major weather concerns, you don't want one-offs from people in weather games, so force in only use them in stacks or
I hadn't thought about weather. I'm thinking
okay.
more of like how many teams are on the slate. I feel like maybe that's a smaller slate. Yeah, smaller slate strategy. If
Okay.
it's just a 4 or 5 game slate, I think I'm more likely to go 5-3. But if you have a 10 game slate or a 15 game slate, the odds that a 5-3 is going to take that down. I don't do that kind of numbers, but just based on experience, I think I'd rather have 5 and 3 one-offs.
Interesting. So I take sort of the opposite approach. I think on larger slates, I'm on when there are a lot of games in the field, I'm more likely to use more correlation. And maybe for me it's like 5-2 with a one off, not 5-3. I mix it up, slate to slate. But I feel like I'm more likely to do that in a larger slate and then in a smaller slate, use less correlation, especially if it's like great pitchers and there's not going to be, that much scoring. I'll just hope for random batters to get hits in smaller slates. But
Right.
yeah, I don't actually know what's optimal there. That's just I make some assumptions there. So that's really interesting to hear.
Yeah. To do some more research when MLB comes around.
If it comes around, we'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see what happens there. But I feel like I should probably be copying your process a little bit more than you should be paying attention to mine. Um, So, what do you think? So, let's do a few listener questions because I asked for them, and we got some good questions. Somebody asked, "What do you feel is your biggest edge in DFS? Is there any particular small things you do differently than most successful DFS players?" And obviously, you've covered a lot of them here, but anything else you want to
Yeah.
touch on that you feel is your biggest edge?
Uh, let's see. I mean, nothing springs to mind. I think my experience is a big edge. If you tallied up the number of hours I put into lineup study and lineup rewind, and this is a year and a half, 2 years ago, for about a year back then with NBA, I was spending hours and hours a day researching and looking for ways to compete. How are these guys winning money or girls winning money every night? I knew there was a secret there, so I spent a lot of time, learned a lot of stuff. So I think a big edge is lineup studying winning players. There's a product on Roto Grinders as well. I can't remember what it's called, but it allows you to study.
Lineup HQ maybe, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's something else. I think it made some improvements to it, but I haven't checked it out recently.
Okay.
But yeah, I think you learn a lot from lineup study. I think a lot of players, especially that message me on Twitter, they just don't have the patience
Yeah.
to look through that. They'll look, okay, so here's 150 of Petty Theft's NBA lineups. What do I do now?
Right.
And like, it's just like, well, look at his lineups
Right.
and start piecing stuff together. So I don't think people have much patience for that. Let's see. So I think experience is a big edge. I've played a lot,
Yep.
and can kind of sense. I guess kind of sense what to do. Obviously, in some situations because they turn out well. So just looking
Yeah.
at things like ownership, yeah, maybe that would be it. Maybe try to take the bias out of your process and stick to the math.
Yep.
Projections, player projections, ownership projections, like that's really all you need.
Yeah. And that comes with experience, I think, being able to take that bias out. So that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like you study players more than just about anybody. I mean, you've been doing the 150 maxer analysis on Twitter for years, and that was I knew about you as the guy who does the 150 max analysis before I ever knew much about you as a DFS player. I think before I realized how successful you were at DFS, I just knew you as the guy who
Mhm.
looked at what 150 maxes are doing.
Well, I,
And
and
now
I
I'm
really
like,
credit that with helping a lot. I was trying to hold myself kind of publicly accountable for to get better. So posting those slate reviews every day, people were kind of if I didn't post one, people would message me and be like, where is it?
yeah,
Um, and in order to post those, you have to look at the previous slate. You got to spend at least 10 minutes looking at the previous slate to see what happened. And I would end up spending 30 minutes. And if you spend 30 minutes on the previous basketball slate, just
every day.
looking at the right things, after a while, yeah, things are going to start to soak in a little bit.
Yeah. That makes sense. And
Uh,
now we have several new Twitter people kind of replicating you a little bit, trying to do what you did, analyzing the slates publicly.
there have been.
So
And there's one that's really good that does a newsletter. I don't think they're selling anything, but they cannot get any followers or just no one's interested in reading their stuff. But
yeah,
they're showing winning lineups for like the Super or the Pro Bowl last year. Just like
right.
it's stuff you should be looking at.
Yeah, yeah. It's good stuff. I think I
But it's
maybe retweeted them once or tweeted about how good their stuff was. But yeah, it's hard for I guess those kind of sites to pick up much of a follow. Maybe because there's too much competition now. It used to be just you doing it. Now there's 5 or 6 out there.
oh well, and just DFS content in general is just it's blown up.
Yeah,
Or it feels like it. I mean, maybe it's contracted. I don't know. I'm in a
I don't know
DFS
either.
bubble anyway, so
Yeah, me too. Yeah, feels like it has, but yeah, who knows?
I know that. Yeah, my friends would be like, I never seen any DFS stuff. What are you talking about? So
Right.
yeah, who knows?
So we've got several questions for you about efficiency. I'll just ask, in terms of time efficiency, is there something you know now that you wish you knew when you started playing DFS?
Yeah, might go back to that previous answer. I wish I knew to trust the projections and ownership and lineup construction for GPPs. I play GPP, so I want lineup construction for each sport that gives you that upside, that ceiling. And there are lineup constructions for each sport that give you that upside. So you want to stick to those lineup constructions and then use projections,
Right.
not bias. Get that out of there, and that practice that and get a procedure down, and I think you'll be surprised how fast you can build lineups
Nice.
that are competitive. And
Yeah.
NBA is a whole other beast because then you got late swap and all the news and all that. But at
Yeah.
least you'll be starting from a solid foundation, maybe.
Yeah. Going back to NBA, just I'm curious, how many crunches do you think you do typically on a large NBA slate, like before you're done, prior to lock, before you end up with your final lineup group? How many
Yeah,
crunches do you think you do?
probably like 40 or 50 would be my guess. And I'm not
That's
studying each one. A lot of it is I'm recrunching because I want the player exposures to be
Yep.
accurate as I go on to the next team to look at them and think about groups and stuff.
Okay.
So anytime when I'm done looking at a team and I've removed players and made groups, I'll recrunch and go to the next team.
Okay. When you
Um,
say team, you mean like an NBA team? Like you do a crunch and then you see like the Wizards. Like how much am I getting from the players on the Wizards, or what do you mean by that?
yeah, well, so I'm going game by game basically with the YouTube guys, right? And they're going to
Okay.
start on the first game.
Yep.
So I've done a crunch. and I know where my stuff stands right now. And then I'll kind of go through the first game with them and remove players I don't want to play, and think about if any groups are necessary. Once I've done that, I'll recrunch.
Okay.
And so I'm only looking at the player pool for that team, and then I'm going through
Okay.
the next team that they're playing at the same pace as the YouTube guys type thing.
That's really interesting. Yeah,
That
I've
makes sense.
I've never done that. I mean, because I don't start until after I've listened to the full hour and kind of gotten, an overview of what the
Oh, I
slate
see
looks
what you're
like
saying.
is when I start after that first hour.
Oh, okay. No, I can't just sit there and listen because I'll get
Okay.
distracted if I'm not focused on NBA
Yep.
DFS. Like I'll just start doing other stuff because I listen to the DFS stuff. I listen to content, but it's like having the radio on or something. Or
Right.
yeah. So I'll just start doing other stuff, and before I know it, I missed the last 5 minutes.
Okay.
It's
That
like
yeah, that's
books on tape.
fascinating.
I can't do it.
I mean, this is really advanced stuff. I feel like you're really putting in a lot of work, and that's
Yeah.
probably something that I'm learning here is just how much work you put into it to be as successful as you are. And another thing that you mentioned on Jordan's podcast that's just coming back to me now is you mentioned that when you are using the late swap optimizer tool, you're going in. So because you play both high stakes and low stakes for MLB, for example, when you play both, you go in and you do different crunches for each different contest. Is that still the case? Am I right about that?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes.
So like if you're doing a 20 max and a 150 max, you're doing a 20 team crunch, and then you're doing a 150 team crunch at the end. That's kind of what you're doing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm still using the late optimizer function.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
like
and
I
and do you
don't
change your settings based on like
no.
whether it's high stakes or low stakes, same settings? Okay.
Right, same settings, and that might be some of the problem I've had before in high stakes. And when I'm talking basketball here,
Okay.
I've removed ownership requirements, like maximum ownership allowed per team.
Okay.
I'll remove that because I feel like that's only needed for the large GPPs.
Right.
So yeah, I'll remove that and run it. But if I have say 200 lineups, I'll still put them in Fantasy Cruncher late swapper
Yeah.
and late swap them all. But I'll do one contact. Like I won't do all 200. I'll do 150 and then 20 and then the 30, exporting them each time. The
Okay.
only reason I use the late swap feature is I don't have to export my lineups and then paste them into Excel. I can just export directly into DraftKings.
Yep.
I don't have to mess
Exactly.
around with Excel.
Just saves you a step. It's much easier
Yeah,
that way. Yep.
exactly. But yeah, definitely, I do different crunches for each contest.
Okay. Yeah, and you mentioned that the way you do it, you could potentially land on the same lineup in multiple different contests, but it doesn't happen that often just because you're using so much randomness that it's not a huge issue for you.
Right. Yep, that's exactly right.
Yep. And then one final question, and it's kind of I feel like a difficult question to answer, but listener asked it. I'll see if you have a good answer for it. Do you have an estimate for an attainable
Uh,
ROI for different major sports? Do you have any thoughts on that?
an attainable ROI.
Yeah.
Um, I can share some of mine, I
You don't
guess.
have to do that if you don't want. Yeah, I wasn't sure if this was a fishing question to but or just I mean I don't think it was. I think that's something that a lot of people just wonder. What can you expect in terms of ROI? I feel like it's a difficult question in that I feel like it varies based on your volume. Like for people who are playing, 100,000
Yeah,
a site, they're probably not getting 100% ROI. Whereas sometimes the people who are only playing, $20 a day, 100% ROI might be attainable. I mean, it's not something you should expect, but like I think that the more volume you play, the more your ROI probably goes down in the long run. But yeah, I don't know if you want to
I agree. That's a
share
very
any
tough
thoughts.
question to answer. There's so many variables that go into that.
Yeah.
Um, like that's just. I mean, my people say I had a good, and I did MLB last year. According to RotoTracker, my ROI was 25%.
Which given how much you play, given your volume, that's massive. I mean, that's a lot of money, 25% when you're
Yeah,
playing at your volume. Whereas somebody who's playing $100 a day, it's like, it's not nearly as exciting. So I
exactly.
think that's
Yeah,
what people don't, kind of always factor in that ROI isn't the same across different people. Like it's Alex Baker's ROI might not be the top in the game. He might still be the top player in the game just because he's playing such high volume just to maintain, even if his ROI is 5% at his kind of volume, that's a ton of money. So like
exactly.
it really varies person to person. So yeah, I think that's a kind of a difficult question to answer really, but I thought maybe you had something that you wanted to say about it since I had the question,
That
figured
is,
I'd ask.
it almost sounds like a cashy question, cash
Yeah.
game type stuff.
And do you play any cash these days?
No, never really have
Okay.
played any cash. I've never seen the point, honestly. Just head to heads. I kind of messed around with Roto Tracker today, looking at some stuff because of this interview, and I think it said I'd played 1,600 something head to heads in my lifetime, and I was 40. I won 49% of them.
Ooh,
Like,
it's tough.
I'm just not interested in the day to day of cash games. Like, I know I've tried. People say it's easy. You make the most optimal lineup, which is obvious based on projections. You put it in, you win 52% of the time or whatever. And I've tried in years past to kind of get into that, and it just does not interest me at all.
Yeah.
Like, I want the $15 to turn into 100 grand.
Yeah.
You know, I don't
I'm
want
the
my
same
three
way.
hundred dollars. Like, if I have an amazing night, I'll win $300. Like, no.
Yeah. I am the same way. I tried cash for a little while because it was mostly before I got more successful at GPPs. I thought, well, maybe this is a sustainable way to become good at DFS because you see, like Blender is a good example of somebody who's good at cash, and it kind of
Yeah,
if you look at his chart on Roto Tracker, it's kind of like a straight line, like it's a pretty gradual upward for the most part, and then he has big spikes obviously when he wins a
I
GPP.
believe that.
But for me, it's like down, 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 spike, and like it's a lot harder, I think, mentally to go through the swings of GPPs, but ultimately I just have a
Yeah,
lot more interested. I got kind of bored with cash, so kind of on the same page as you there, I think.
for sure. And it's also, again, just anecdotal, but it's important to me to keep what little brain I have focused on GPPs. Thinking about cash games interferes with that. It's the same reason I don't play on other sites. Um, I'm focused on DraftKings GPP. Maybe I should be playing FanDuel, and maybe I will when baseball starts, but not for basketball. The salaries are different, lineup construction is different. I can't handle it. So I'd rather just
Yeah,
focus on one thing.
yeah, that makes sense. Well, I think that's all the questions that I had for you. I am curious. So you're thinking about potentially making a career change, and it sounds like you're probably just going to go into DFS full time. But are you somebody who would ever consider doing like coaching or DFS content? Is that something that is on
Mm.
the horizon for you? Something you would consider at some point, or are you? I mean, I guess you have in the past. You've written for Awesemo. Maybe your interest is more in writing. But what kind of
Yeah.
interest do you have in doing DFS content going forward? Just to close it out, be interested in hearing.
Yeah, at the moment, I'd have to say none.
Okay.
Um, yeah, no interest. I did do some articles specifically on NBA Showdown for Osmo during the NBA playoffs a year or two ago, and that was fun. But um, yeah, I mean, it felt like work, I guess is the easiest way to put it. Like, I'm not as passionate now about, and I think Petty talked about this a bit. I'm not as passionate now about DFS as I was, um, before I made before I made the money. So before I was grinding and looking for every edge and spending hours and hours a day with it and wanting first. But now that's happened, I started the same passion. It's basically just have like a robotic entry strategy, and then if I want to, I can hopefully watch the sweat of the games and stuff. Um, Hopefully that happens. But yeah, no on DFS content. And what was the
And,
other?
and no coaching. Any interest in coaching?
Oh, coaching I've never tried. My DMs are open. I'm happy to answer questions that anyone asks about strategy. It a lot. I don't know what the issue is. But I'll explain that. If you have questions on DraftKings 150 lineup GPP strategy, then yeah, we can talk. And next thing you know, 30 minutes before lock, they're asking me what I think about such and such player.
Yep.
And it turns out they play on FanDuel, and it kind of becomes a mess. But I've definitely had some great conversations with people, and I tell them answering questions makes me smarter on it because it does. Because just talking about it with other people, and sometimes they ask questions in a certain way that really makes you think about your own process. So I've learned from answering questions, and hopefully helped a few people as well. Well, I know I have that have found success. So
That's awesome.
yeah, probably not coaching on that website for such and such amount per hour or anything. But yeah, I'm
Okay.
happy to answer DMs.
Right on. Anything else that you'd want to share, or where can people reach you?
Well, on Twitter, Uhhuhbro. That's the only place they can reach me. Yeah, nothing else to share. I don't think.
All
Just
right.
yeah,
Cool. Well,
enjoyed talking to you.
yeah, thanks a lot for coming on. That was short notice, so I was planning on asking you to be on next week anyway, but I was really happy that you were able to come on such short notice.
Oh yeah, well, happy to help. Yeah, I've enjoyed the first two podcasts for sure. So I'm looking forward to. Hope you can salvage that RBX interview.
Yeah, me
And
too. It was a fun interview, but
well, Looking
one was
forward
a
to
fun
see
one
who
too.
you have on after this, for sure.
Cool, right on. Well,
Yeah.
thanks again to Peter Viles for joining me on High Stakes Episode 3. You'll be able to catch High Stakes Episode 4 next Friday at 8 Eastern. Thanks for watching and enjoy your night.